Breaking tonight, Canada's trade strategy just shifted dramatically. Mark Carney didn't panic. He called in the one person who knows where every lever of power sits in Ottawa. Tensions are rising across the continent tonight. Donald Trump has called CUSMA irrelevant. He's threatened tariffs on Canadian aircraft. He's promised to block the Gordie Howe International Bridge from opening. And just last week, his trade representative floated the idea of ripping up the three-country deal entirely and forcing Canada into a separate bilateral negotiation. Everyone believed Ottawa would scramble. Markets expected a reactionary response. Pundits assumed Canada would send a political heavyweight to match Trump's bluster with bluster. Analysts figured Carney would appoint someone flashy, someone combative, someone designed to grab headlines. They were all utterly incorrect. Ottawa, Monday morning. The Prime Minister's office released a statement that on the surface looked routine. A new chief trade negotiator to the United States had been named, but the name attached to that title told a very different story. Janice Charette, twice clerk of the Privy Council, former High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, the woman who recommended invoking the Emergencies Act for the first time in Canadian history, the person who has sat in every room that matters in this country's federal government for over a decade. Translation: Ottawa just told Washington that Canada isn't showing up to these trade talks with emotion. It's showing up with institutional memory. And that changes everything. Dear viewers, to understand why this appointment matters, you need to understand what Trump's team is actually doing right now. Because this isn't really about tariffs. It never was. This is about negotiation psychology, and Carney just made a move that completely reframes the dynamic. Let's rewind to December. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer sat in front of a congressional committee and rattled off a list of grievances against Canada. The Online Streaming Act, dairy market access, provincial bans on the sale of American alcohol. He delivered it like a prosecutor reading charges. Then came the real signal. Greer floated the idea of breaking CUSMA apart entirely. No more trilateral agreement, separate bilateral deals with Canada and Mexico. On the surface, that sounds like a technical restructuring. In reality, it's a classic pressure tactic. Isolate each partner, negotiate from maximum leverage, force concessions one country at a time. Now layer on what Trump himself has said. During his White House meeting with Carney, he called CUSMA transitional, said it may have served its purpose. Then last month he went further, called the deal irrelevant, said it offered no real advantage to the United States. That's not analysis, that's positioning. Trump is trying to create the perception that CUSMA is already dead, so that when formal review begins, Canada walks in feeling like it's negotiating from weakness, like it needs to prove the deal deserves to exist. And here's where Sheret changes the equation. See, there's a very specific reason why Carney chose a former clerk of the Privy Council for this role. The clerk isn't just a bureaucrat. The clerk is the head of Canada's entire public service, the person who coordinates every department, every briefing, every policy recommendation that reaches the Prime Minister's desk. If you've held that job, you don't just understand trade policy, you understand how the entire machinery of government connects to trade policy. Sheret held that position twice, first from 2014 to 2016 during the original NAFTA renegotiation tensions, then again from 2021 to 2023 during some of the most volatile years in recent Canadian governance. Think about what that means in practical terms. She knows every file. She knows where the vulnerabilities are. She knows where Canada's leverage actually sits. She knows which American demands are serious and which ones are theater. And critically, she has direct relationships with the senior officials on both sides of the border who were in the room during the first round of CUSMA negotiations. Trump's team operates on disruption. They throw out inflammatory statements, shift positions constantly, use public pressure to create chaos at the negotiation table. Their strategy depends on the other side being reactive. on catching their opponents off balance, on forcing emotional decisions under artificial time pressure. Sheret is the opposite of reactive. Her entire career has been built on institutional process, on reading situations clearly, preparing exhaustively, and responding with precision rather than impulse. When she recommended invoking the Emergencies Act in 2022 to clear the Ottawa convoy blockades, that wasn't a panic decision. She later defended that recommendation under oath at the Public Order Emergency Commission, calmly, methodically, with the kind of composure that comes from decades of operating at the highest levels of government during genuine crises. That's exactly the temperament you want across the table from a negotiation team that thrives on chaos. Now let's talk about what's actually at stake in this CUSMA review. Because the details matter enormously, and Trump's team is counting on the public not paying attention to them. CUSMA covers virtually every major sector of the Canada-US economic relationship. Auto manufacturing, steel and aluminum, agriculture, energy, digital commerce. The agreement sets the rules for over $2 billion in goods crossing the border every single day. It's not just a trade deal, it's the operating system for the largest bilateral trading relationship on the planet. Trump has already started chipping away at it. Tariffs on steel and aluminum, tariffs on auto parts, tariffs on lumber and energy, levies on goods that don't comply with CUSMA rules of origin. And after Carney's speech in Davos last month, the one widely interpreted as a direct rebuke of Trump's foreign policy, the president threatened additional tariffs on Canadian aircraft. Then came the Gordie Howe Bridge threat, a $6 billion infrastructure project connecting Windsor, Ontario, to Detroit, Michigan. Nearly complete, poised to become the newest and most modern border crossing between the two countries. Trump promised to block its opening, not because of any legitimate policy concern, because he wanted to send a message. And here's what makes this moment so dangerous. The formal CUSMA review is scheduled for this year. That means everything Trump has done over the past 12 months, the tariffs, the inflammatory language, the bridge threat, calling the deal irrelevant, all of it is prelude. It's table setting. He's trying to walk into that review with maximum leverage and minimum good faith. Against that backdrop, Carney's choice of negotiator becomes a statement in itself. Dear viewers, there's something deeper happening here that most coverage is missing entirely. Look at what else is moving simultaneously. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc is currently in Mexico leading a trade mission to strengthen ties with Canada's other CUSMA partner. Canada signed a new trade agreement with China last month, a move that infuriated Trump, but signaled to the world that Ottawa is actively diversifying its economic relationships. Now add Sheret to the picture. Carney isn't just appointing a negotiator, he's assembling a strategic posture. LeBlanc building relationships in Mexico City, a new trade framework with Beijing, and now the most experienced institutional operator in Ottawa's history sitting across from Jamieson Greer. The message is unmistakable. Canada will negotiate CUSMA seriously, professionally, and in good faith. But it will not negotiate from desperation. It has options. It has partners. And the person leading its delegation has forgotten more about how these deals work than most of Trump's appointees will ever learn. This is what institutional memory looks like when it's deployed as strategy. Sheret doesn't need to study briefing books about CUSMA's history. She was there when the framework was built. She knows which provisions Canada fought hardest for. She knows which American demands were bluffs the first time around. She knows the difference between what Greer says publicly and what his team actually needs to bring home. And perhaps most importantly, she knows that the single greatest mistake Canada could make in these negotiations is to mirror Trump's emotional volatility. The moment Ottawa starts reacting to tweets and press conference provocations, it loses the one advantage it has: discipline. Now here's what I need you to understand about the next 6 months. This CUSMA review is going to be one of the most consequential economic negotiations Canada has faced in a generation. Trump's team will try to fracture the trilateral structure. They'll push for bilateral deals that give Washington more leverage. They'll use tariff threats as bargaining chips. They'll leak inflammatory statements to the media to create public pressure. And sitting across the table from all of that will be Janice Charette, calm, prepared, armed with 30 years of institutional knowledge and the full backing of a prime minister who understands exactly what's at stake. Carney didn't pick a fighter, he picked a strategist. And in a negotiation against an opponent who wants you to fight emotionally, that might be the smartest move on the board. Dear viewers, this is the story that defines Canada's economic future. Not the tariff headlines, not the bridge threats, not the inflammatory quotes. The story is in the appointments, in the strategy, in the quiet, deliberate decisions that determine whether a country negotiates from strength or from fear. Canada just chose strength, and the person carrying that strategy forward has been prepared for exactly this moment for her entire career. If this analysis helped you see what's really happening behind the headlines, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you're subscribed because the CUSMA review is about to begin, and this channel will be tracking every move. This is Canada Next, and the negotiation has already started.